Welcome to Reddit Quests. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more videos. Redditors who quit in the heat of the moment, what dumpster fire did you leave the with? Story 1. Worked as a small engine repair tech for a larger company. I'm also in the National Guard. I'd gotten hurt and needed physical therapy, and 1 or 2 days a month I would have to miss because of an extended drill weekend. Well, my boss didn't like that, and she decided that she would punish me by making me stay later than everyone else. She was punishing me for going to physical therapy for a workplace injury and for being a soldier. Now you may be thinking, having to stay late to keep up on your work doesn't sound like that much of a punishment. Normally you would be right, but trust me, she was doing a lot more to make sure it was a punishment. Well, one day after being told that I was not given approval for the 1 day of vacation, I asked for 3 months in advance to go see the eclipse and generally being treated like a slave. I was like, why am I doing this to myself, and clocked out at the end of my shift. That next Monday after drill weekend I showed up, packed up all my tools and took off. My boss started freaking out when she saw what I was doing. I left and found out that me leaving cost her over $100,000 because she had to ship my workload to another state to get another shop to work on them. That meant she needed to pay to ship them and then pay to ship them back, and since her shop didn't do any of the actual work, she never saw any money for any of the repairs. It was over 80 riding mowers. Story 2, I had a job as a fairly niche field service engineer in IT. Started off covering my local area, which was fine, maybe an hour traveling time to my most remote site, tops. Then they lost an engineer in my adjacent territory, and I had to cover that too. Put my travel time up to about 2.5 hours each way. That wasn't great, but it was temporary, allegedly. They lost a further engineer, and guess what? I had to cover that area too. That meant I was having to do up to 4 hours driving each way just to get to a site, and then they expected me to put in up to a full 8-hour day. I mentioned this to my manager and pointed out that if I was pulling multi-day jobs at a site 4 hours away, it'd be far better to put me up in a hotel, but they said nah, as it was unusual for me to do multi-day installs. Anyway, a month or so later I was expected to put in a complete new system at a site, spec'd up 4 full days to do it, high-profile client, and I basically told my manager I needed a hotel. They pushed back, it's only 4 days, you'll be fine, just charge them the travel time as worked hours, which is fine, but I was salaried, and they were the ones invoicing the client, so no overtime for me. Anyway, on the second day I arrived at nearly lunchtime after a massive accident on the motorway held me up for 4 hours and got a complete blocking off the client for it. I thought of this, packed my tools, left the site with their old system ripped out and a pile of unopened boxes of new kit, switched off my mobile, and drove to head office. Parked close enough to the main entrance that the car operated the automatic doors, went into reception, and told the receptionist, very politely it wasn't her fault, that I quit. All my gear was in the car and here are my keys, phone and pass, then walked out and got a cab home. Found out from a friend that they lost that client, which was one of their main ones, even after my manager basically spent the rest of the week installing the kit on his own, without any documentation as I'd written the spec and accidentally kept it. Story 3. Famous footwear. During the interview, manager wouldn't shut up about how she wanted the other person but would hire me just to give me a chance. Worked there for 5 shifts. On day 2, she went and asked my previous managers about my sex life. The one that really peeved me was she specifically asked my last employer who was employing my roommate while my roommate was on shift if I was sleeping with my roommate. On day 3, she got mad at me for doing something wrong after refusing to train me. I asked numerous times about pricing shoes. She would just do one silently without showing me where to look on the scanner or what exactly she was scanning or anything, and then hand it back as if she had retrained me. On day 4, she berated me saying if I quit it would royally F her vacation up, which was the only reason she hired me over the other person. But now she wouldn't have time to train a new person to cover her vacation, which was still 2 months out. My roommate put in notice at her job on this day. On day 5, manager hears that roommate got a better job. She confronts me saying I better not quit and then asks if I planned on putting in 2 weeks. I tell her I'd been considering because she refused to train me, and she was asking inappropriate questions to my previous employers. She went off on me, yelling at me on the sales floor, telling me not to ever come back. She then put that she had terminated me in my paperwork due to insubordination and theft, as well as sending my one and only paycheck to the wrong address 5 times before I finally got HR to just cancel the old checks and mail it directly to me. Edit. My last day was on a Saturday. All except one of her staff quit by the following Tuesday, 3 days later. I accidentally brought one of the box knives home. I called asking if she wanted it back, and she threatened to call the cops if I ever showed up again. During the trying to get my check, I mentioned the questioning of my previous employers. They said they would deal with it. I moved out of town and never went back anyways, so not sure if she still works there. I did get my check, however she lied about how much I would be making, so I was about $30 short because I was making $13 hourly instead of $14.50. Was so fed up with everything I said F that and just called it the amount I would willingly pay to have her out of my life forever. Story 4. I left a job for similar tattling once. I was working as a bank teller and the assistant branch manager and manager were horrible. Total gossips and ish spreaders, they had no qualms about treating staff like absolute ish. I was often picked on because I was interested in dark things. Apparently reading Dracula during my Fing lunch break in the break room was considered freakishly morbid. I worked there for a little over a year. Shortly before I left, another employee left because of the bullying. She had been there for years. A total sweetheart of a woman, wouldn't hurt a fly if she could avoid it. She called me in tears the day she quit because she just mentally couldn't take it anymore. Her husband had begged her to leave, it was affecting her mental health that much. One day I was sick as a dog but had dragged myself in because I was only scheduled for a half day anyway and they begged me to come. As the morning ticked by, I was feeling worse and regretting my decision to try and suck it up. Manager told me I could go home after she got back from her meeting. She had her Chamber of Commerce meeting for the morning, then spent the next 2 hours waltzing in and out of the branch and blatantly ignoring me. It was dead as F in the middle of winter with a full teller line, so there was no reason she couldn't just let me go home. The longer the morning went on, the madder I was getting. It was rapidly approaching the time I was scheduled to leave in the first place. I was running a fever, dead on my feet and feeling weak and dizzy. Regular customers who came in were asking me if I was alright because I looked like death walking. At one point I muttered to myself that this was effing bullish. I didn't say it in earshot of customers, the branch was completely empty. A few minutes later, one of the other tellers then excused herself from the line and went into the assistant manager's office. As soon as the manager waltzed in again, the assistant manager went running into her office and shut the door. The manager then came storming out and over to my station and demanded I get in her office. Now. I flat out refused. By this point I was just effing done. Mentally, physically, every sense of the word done. I would have been damned if I was going to let this cunt ream me out on a day when I was feeling like death, and I had done her a favor by coming in at all. The look on her little piggy face I will carry forever in my heart. How effing dare I speak to her that way? Didn't I know who she was? She demanded I get in her office again. I refused again. I could see the other tellers on the line looking back and forth between us. She narrowed her eyes and I swear to God I thought she was going to stamp her feet. If I didn't get in her office now, then I was done. I told her fine. She came storming around the teller line and told me to start counting out my drawer and balancing out. I did. Packed up my ish and went home and crashed out. A couple months later she was arrested for embezzling something like $500K in customer accounts, even opening $80K in credit cards under her elderly parents' names. She lost everything. Got sent to jail for something close to a decade. I took great delight in her downfall. When the news broke, the other employee who had quit called me on the phone laughing. It still warms a small area of my heart to think about it. Schadenfreude? Maybe, but she brought it on herself. Story 5. I was working at a small bar hotel in some remote place. The manager was an absolute jackass. Just rude to staff and the customers and unpleasant to be around. There was only a small handful of staff there expected to work all day every day, me included. We were casuals. I worked 9 long days in a row, finishing really late and getting up really early in the morning to come back and clean the hotel, with not many hours in between. Pretty sure illegal in Australia. It also wasn't that close to my house, about a 40 minutes drive each way. I had a day off after my long stint doing lots of shifts which I was excited about, and planned a nice day out with my BF. But the manager rings me the day before to ask me to cover someone's shift who wanted it off. I said no, I had plans. He lost his ish and told me when I started I agreed to work weekends and I need to be available. Well yeah, I worked every weekend since I started and I would have been available, but I wasn't rostered on originally. Decided I had enough of being treated like crap and the money wasn't worth it to dread coming to work. I don't like confrontation and felt bad my friend got me the job, so I wrote a letter quitting and planned to leave it on manager's desk and GTFO of there. Plan half failed cause I got asked to stay back at work and panicked cause manager was out, so it was perfect to leave the letter on his desk, but if I stayed back he'd be back and I wouldn't have the chance. Stayed back for a bit, then decided stuff it I'm leaving, so said I forgot I had an appointment, dropped the letter and ran. I was casual so didn't have to give notice. Manager has a big party booked in for the next day and I was his only staff who could work it. Not anymore. He rang me nonstop for 2 days and I ignored it. Best decision ever. Edit, 40 mins not 49 LOL oddly specific. Story 6. I quit a few hours after my shift was over, but the next day was one of our most physically intense workdays. For 6 months my supervisors kept promising a raise promotion that never came. No matter how many more responsibilities I got or how well I worked, all I got were empty promises. It also didn't help that my mental physical health was starting to suffer. I sucked it up for a long time hoping that things would eventually get better, but they didn't. When I had enough, I sent in a text message to the group chat that all of the workers were a part of and said something like, "Don't expect me at work tomorrow or in the future, I quit." Once I sent in that message, a few coworkers tried reaching out to me and one of my supervisors tried to get in touch. I assumed they were trying to get me to change my mind, but I was set on what I did, so I never spoke to any of my former supervisors, and it was a bit of a while before I fully opened up to my former coworkers. Besides having to deal with a physically intense shift the next day, I left them with a lot to handle. Even though I held the lowest position at that job, my supervisors knew that they could rely on me. So I had the work of 3 people. That was more suitable for an assistant manager. Since I was on good terms with one of my former coworkers, every now and then she'd let me know how things were. They ended up hiring 2 new guys to try and fill the hole I left, but they were never able to match what I was able to do. Prior to them being hired, my supervisors tried to spread out all of the work that I left behind. That resulted in the employees that worked there being overworked, and it all turned into an ish show. 3 months after I left, my former supervisors were still trying to get me to come back, but I didn't want to. Eventually I found out that my head supervisor was lying about the promotion raise that I was promised. It was never on its way. It turned out he did the same to other workers at this job, and he turned most of the employees against him. When everyone found out what a piece of ish he was and how big of a problem he was, he decided to transfer out rather than be fired. It took a few months, but after I quit, a few other workers either left on good terms or had their contracts come to an end and chose not to come back. I like to believe that me quitting was the final straw that eventually led to all of the change that happened at this job. Story 7. Liquorland. After being lied to, screwed out of a healthy redundancy package that I was entitled to, and had a bevy of false accusations placed against me so they could fire me, none of them stuck because they were made up, I quit in my own special way. I first waited until my store manager, area manager, and state manager all were on annual leave, and I'd be running the shop. I then got a doctor's note giving me 3 weeks off work for a strained back muscle. That afternoon, on Friday, the busiest trading day of the week, half an hour after taking over, I wrote my resignation emails. One went to the CEO, upper management, and board members detailing how I'd been screwed over by my managers for the previous 18 months, threatening legal action and going to the press if my leave payouts were withheld. The second was to my area manager's email, who was uncontactable on leave, stating my 2 weeks' notice to resign and attaching a copy of my doctor's certificate that said I was unable to work. Then, I shut and locked the doors, threw the keys in the safe, and went home. I turned my phone off, drank 2 bottles of wine, and played the F out of some Final Fantasy. On the following Monday, I checked my bank account to find all my annual leave paid out and my 2 weeks of notice paid out as sick leave. Still, F you Liquorland. I refused to buy at any West Farmers owned store thanks to the way I was treated. Story 8. I was taken on at a firm that makes some proprietary hardware. They wanted a cut-down mobile version of what their hardware in the form of an app, so they hired me. Now this was my first programming job, and I was hired with the job title of junior developer. For some added context, I had been looking for a job in programming for a long time, upwards of a year. And since I didn't have a degree or industrial experience, nobody would look my way. The interview I went for at this place wasn't even for this job, it was in IT support, but they saw I had programming experience from my own projects on my CV and offered me the junior dev job instead on the basis of a minimum wage trial where I would see a pay rise at the end of that trial. Initially, they had me familiarizing myself with the platform we would be using, and after a week I presented them with a few little things I had made, and they seemed happy. So they gave me my first bits of work relating to the actual requirements, and straight away, it was far too much for someone on their first programming job to do quickly, but I still made progress. They then dropped the junior from my job title and give me full responsibility on the app. That was my first real I should probably leave this place moment. When the trial came to an end, they said they were happy with my progress. However, they are only increasing my pay from one minimum wage to the other one. In the UK, we have a 21, 24 bracket and a 24 plus bracket for minimum wages of £7, 70 HR and £8, 21 in HR. Safe to say I wasn't happy, so I called in sick the day after and spent the day preparing a fresh new CV with this experience. When I called in sick, they said, "It is clearly due to our meeting yesterday. You aren't happy, are you?" So I told them I wasn't, and that I need some time to reassess what I want. They told me I had better be in the next day, otherwise that was the end. I called them back later that day and told them I wasn't coming back, 6 months before they had told their partners this app was due to launch. A few days later, I had an interview lined up working with similar technology and got offered the job on the spot with a hefty pay rise. Story 9. Not quite a FU, I quit moment, but I did get a certain satisfaction of karma finally being served. I used to work as a cinema manager. I joined a big multiplex and was the junior manager. As a result, I got the worst roster, always worked Saturday nights and the holidays. Part of being a junior manager meant that I was the primary person on call should the alarm go off when we were closed. Which meant on the few occasions it did go off, I was expected to get up and go to the cinema in the early hours of the morning and deal with whatever happened. The general manager was a complete tosser, never did the busy shifts and blamed everyone under him for when things went wrong. I lost count of the times, as the junior, that when we did a split shift, with him doing the first shift, I'd take over and money was missing or similar, and then, as the closer, it would be my signature recording the loss. So, I quit. I found a better job, and left. About 12 months later, I got a phone call at 3 in the morning from my old cinema security company. The alarm had gone off, and I needed to come immediately. Even if I had wanted to go, I no longer held keys to the premises, so had to decline. They had not updated the call list, and I knew the next person on the roster was the terrible general manager. It still makes me smile to think of him getting that call. Story 10, I've told this before. I was working at a bank in the mortgage department. I hated the job for multiple reasons. I threw all my files into the secured shred bin, cleaned out my desk, threw my keys at my terrible boss, and peaced out. A few weeks later, my friend told me I created a mess at work because they were in process of foreclosure on all those homes, but now they had no paper trail. I must have saved 25, 30 people from losing their homes. Story 11. Once volunteered for charity work. We gave food baskets and clothes. When we arrived at the spot, me and the other workers were overwhelmed by the number of the people, and we had to keep things going, so we worked slowly to ensure that everyone got what they deserved. Shortly after, our supervisors came and started yelling at us for how bad we were working, and how we were scum for not wanting to really help the poor. People, the poor, stood with the supervisors and started to talk trash. We looked at each other and we were like, "We quit, deal with the rest." He said that we would sue us for doing this, even when we volunteered for a paid job. The people started to steal and loot what we were holding. We watched as he started to make calls, but to no avail. Story 12. I get to tell my story. Here goes. I taught at a small private school for 7 years. In that time that I worked there, I taught all art classes for all grades K-12, and even did other tasks for the school, such as help students with college prep, sub for other classes, and wrote all of the content and curriculum for the art program. I was the only art teacher there. I put so much work, time, energy, and love into my job, and I truly loved being there. The only thing was, the man who founded the school didn't have any background in education or child studies whatsoever. And what's worse, he couldn't manage money. Paychecks bounced, arrived late, and our direct deposit disappeared last summer. If he didn't blame the accountant for these errors, he blamed us for our lack of morale. If any of us needed supplies, we always had to buy them on our own, with a promise that he would reimburse us, provided that we turned in an expense report. Even when we did, it could take up to 6 months before we'd see our money back. The final straw was when my salaried paycheck, which was already 5 days late, didn't arrive. 5 of my co-workers and I were called into a meeting in his office. During this meeting, he informed us that we weren't getting paid, and he didn't know when he would be able to pay us. The month was only a week away from ending, and we had not received one paycheck for it. We were livid. His excuses? He was kicked out of his family trust over the holiday weekend, so that's why he had no money. When 2 of my co-workers asked if he would take out a loan to cover our checks, he said no. He also told us just to wait until his business deal clears, with some person and deal that we had never heard of, and with total lack of details and transparency, with no guarantee of a payday or pay in general, His actions of blaming everyone but himself for the situation, and after years of putting up with excuses, blame, lies, and bullish, I took my toys and went home. I didn't show up the following day and I filed for unemployment right away, which I won. Sadly, I was the only one at the time who could see the writing on the wall. My supervisor left 2 weeks later. Story 13. Had put my 2 weeks in at one of those terrible marketing jobs where your job is to annoy people about cable packages. I was on a conference call with a boss and all of the remote reps going over new equipment and Black Friday promotions. I asked a question about the equipment, to which the boss responded with, "I'm going to pretend you didn't ask that question, moving on." I hung up the call, texted the boss saying, "I'm going to pretend I put my notice in 2 weeks ago." Leaving a store unstaffed for Black Friday. Story 14. Left an auto parts store the Saturday before they fired the assistant manager and the other key holder for theft. They expected me to take the assistant position for a 50-cent raise, 9.75 total, and work 70 hours a week to help keep ish going smoothly. Told me my upcoming vacation to Europe, fully paid for, could no longer happen, and I'd be on call every day and to expect to work every day. Family, school, second job, all on hold, out the window, didn't matter what was going on, I was to be at work every day. Rather than put up with that, I left my key on the manager's desk and walked out. The assistant manager that was to be fired ended up doing what I did Sunday night after closing. Key on the desk, never came back. The only other key holder was arrested the next week for theft. Never went back. Last I heard, the manager was pulling doubles each day, and the a-hole district manager was having to go in to help cover shifts. Story 15. Me and 5 more of my friends got sick of the management. We would work every single day early morning till late at night. When we used to ask management, who are supposed to work shifts, to help us with some shifts, especially when we wanted to take vacation, they would tell us no and continue smoking and doing coke outside the restaurant. The weekend they were meant to open 2 new outlets. Me and 5 other friends all left together and took our notice as leave, which meant they had absolutely no one to work on those days. Really do love going and eating there on my weekends off, whilst they work their butts off because no one wants to go work at their stupid place. Story 16. I started a job building and troubleshooting electronic equipment. I was told I would get a raise after 90 days and again at 6 months. He hired a woman to do all of the wire wrapping for a big order. There were only 2 of us, and I asked my boss how she was doing because I did not have time to examine her work. He told, "She's doing fine, she's really fast." I knew how picky the customer was, and the directions they provided for the assembly were very explicit. Sure enough, we finished the project, it's delivered to the customer. The woman who did the wire wrap quite immediately afterwards, everything she had done was rejected. It all got returned to me and it all had to be inspected and then repaired. I spent 3 months getting everything done. I went to my boss and said, I was supposed to get a raise. He tells me he did give me a raise and I said it's not in my paycheck. We went around about it and I thought, that's it, I'm done. I found another job when I told my boss I needed the next Monday off so I could do my physical for my new job. My boss was pissed and said, "You should leave right now." I said, "You are firing me for giving notice?" Cool, and I immediately walked out. Now I was in the middle of fabricating and wiring a pretty large piece of equipment. I heard later, when he realized what I left him, he got very angry and was throwing things and screaming. Couldn't have happened to a more deserving guy. Story 17. I work primarily in locked mental health facilities for kids, teens. Part of this job is the simple fact that sometimes you are forced to go over on your hours. Not legally forced, but there are safety regulations about ratios of staff to patient. I understand this, and while it sucks, it's part of the job. Well, this facility, let's call it Newport News Behavioral Health Center, that's definitely just a name I made up and not the real name of the facility, was managed by people who had no idea what they were doing. We consistently ran out of supplies for the kids. They lived on site if they were on the urgent side. We didn't have proper equipment for staff and often worked at well over the ratio we were supposed to, which is dangerous for everyone. Also, favoritism was rampant. Some staff members could spend entire shifts just passing out free food to staff, kids they liked, while never doing their actual job. The same staff favorites never worked a minute past our 12-hour shift times. All in all, it was awful. Well, one day I'm on hour 16 of a 12-hour shift when the night manager gets on and tells me we have to take this kid to the emergency room. Keep in mind, this kid was with me for the last 16 hours and no one thought it was an emergency. Nothing had changed with his status. I tell them there is no way I can do that. The ER will be hours and I have to come right back there at 7 a.m. to do this all over again. The manager said he would mandate me to stay. I walked out. They fired me. You think that's the end? But it isn't. I had kept meticulous records of every time I was harassed, mandated to stay for long shifts while the favorites left early, and forced to spend my own money for supplies for the kids. We are talking things like tampons, pads, not crayons or something. I had dates, times, locations, and everything done there was on camera. I submitted it to HR and told them I wouldn't sue. I just wanted my job back. They reinstated me, but I wasn't done yet. The terrible managers all liked to stay in their offices and have meals with members of staff they liked, leaving the rest of the staff with the kids. They had planned this elaborate get-together for them during work hours. Well, what they didn't know is not only was I well liked by the kids, but most staff liked working with me because I took my job seriously and was fair. I had been talking about unionizing as well. Instead, we decided to say, F this. At first, we wanted to all walk out together but decided against it because while we would love to stick it to them hard like that, we still loved the kids and didn't want to risk them being injured. So we did the next best thing. The most fed up with us quit that week. Leaving shifts that needed coverage, everyone who got a call to pick up a shift refused to do it for less than a $100 incentive bonus. Then another wave of quitting. Same thing now except it's $200 incentive bonus time. The final wave came when all the managers had planned their lunch. We knew there would be managers to make sure the kids were okay, so we all walked out. There was around 150 people working there. This includes maintenance and office people, not just counselors. They had about 60 counselors, 15 or so full-time, 10 part-time, and the rest PRN. Out of those 60, 37 quit on the same month. 3 full-time stayed. We also reported the F out of them to any agency that we could. Sadly, it doesn't have a badass ending, as last I heard they were negligent in their care of a teenager, and she died. TLDR. Facility was abusive to staff and clients. I quit with 36 others and they were left to scramble. Also multiple reports to government agencies and rumors they will be shut down soon. Story 18. I was working in a very specific high-tech field for a Fortune 500 company for 12 years. It was a super stressful job using highly specific computer software to get custom, very expensive product out the door of our plant. I was really good at what I did, worked like crazy. 10, 12-hour days, 7 days a week sometimes, to keep up with on-time delivery to the customer. This was salaried, no overtime pays. I trained people. I was the go-to person if people couldn't figure things out. Unfortunately, a lot of management there was old school. They wanted things to be like they were in the 1950s. It was more important to my boss that he keep track of what time I showed up for work and what time I left, rather than how well I did my job. The administrative assistant hoarded office supplies, and you could not get a pen or a roll of scotch tape without begging her for them. There were also a lot of backstabbing, useless people there, who continued to keep employed simply by making other people look bad. Since I was sitting at a desk job for 10, 12 hours a day, I took 2 casual breaks per day and a 30-minute lunch. There were no assigned breaks, and since I was working no less than 10 hours a day, even with a few breaks in there, I still had plenty more than 40 hours a week. I would use my breaks to walk around the plant, to keep my body moving and get some exercise. Cue backstabbers. My boss sits me down one day absolutely furious. Keep in mind, he knew I was the only employee of his working 10, 12 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week. He told me that someone had told him I was spending 4, 5 hours a day just wandering the plant, effectively stealing from the company. I was no longer allowed to leave my desk. I was given 2 10-minute bathroom breaks a day and a lunch. These rules did not apply to anyone else in the company. I was upset that he took the word over someone else over knowing me and how I worked. I told him he should have told this person, I'm her supervisor and I am completely knowledgeable about the hours she works and the time she takes breaks. He was more concerned about treating me like a 5-year-old than the fact I was one of the best at what I did at that company. I tried to do what he told me to do for a few weeks, sit at a desk without moving for 12 hours a day. My back went out. Both hips, knees, and ankles. I ended up in this hospital and missed a week of work. When I got back, my boss told me if I ever missed another day because of my back, I would have to file disability, so he would only have to pay me %60 pay for a day I missed because of my back. That was a Monday. I had a new job by Wednesday. I walked into his office, handed him my typed letter of resignation, and told him, Friday will be my last day. The look on his face was priceless. In my industry, notice is usually a month, not a few days. 2 years later, former co-workers still text me, email me, and call me, telling me they miss me and things are not the same there without me. Because I was the one who knew everything and knew how to rally the team. Edit. And the boss had to hire 4 people to replace me. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more videos. Take care.